Good morning, everyone. My name is Sabrina Beer. I'm energy specialist here at ADB, and I will be guiding through today's morning session, deep dive session titled Marine Renewable Energy, Role of Offshore Wind in Catalyzing Sustainable Development. Let me express a heartfelt welcome to our dear audience, the speakers and the panelists, and especially also welcome our session's co-organizers, the Global Wind Energy Council, GWEC, with whom the ADB has been enjoying a fantastic long-standing cooperation. In today's deep dive workshop, we will start with opening remarks, 2 keynote presentations on offshore wind and other marine renewable energy technologies. Thereafter, we will invite for a panel discussion on offshore wind and closing remarks. Questions from the audience after presentations and the panel discussion are very welcome. Without further ado, I would like to invite to the stage for welcoming remarks Ms. Liming Chiao, Chief Strategy Officer Asia and Head of Asia at GWEC. Liming has more than 20 years of experience working in renewable energy and climate policy and more than 15 years at GWEC, where she has been working closely with the wind industry to promote a better policy environment for the wind sector in Asia. Dear Liming, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great honor to be here. And also, we're very grateful to be co-hosting this session together with the ADB. And today, really, I think it's the first time that we see the ASEF featuring marine renewable energy with a spotlight onto the offshore wind technology. And this reflects not only an increasing interest in this emerging technology, but also the rising urgency of us exploring and accelerating this technology, this very vital piece of technology in the energy transition. So let's begin with looking at where we are in the globally with the offshore wind technology. Offshore wind has already truly becoming global, growing out of the European kind of home bases in the past 5 years. Today, we see 83 gigawatt of offshore wind being installed globally, and half of that is happening in Asia Pacific. And most of that half is happening very concentrated in one country, that's China. But this situation will soon be changed with a number of Asia Pacific countries joining the league by end of this decade. And end of last year, we saw the installation of about 8 gigawatt added into the installation, which is 26% of decrease from the previous years. Despite that, this still marks the 4th highest installation on the record. And this small changes, small fluctuations is indeed happening, but we still see very strong fundamentals for this technology going forward. And actually, parallel to that 8 gigawatt being installed last year, we see 45 gigawatt under construction right now. And last year also saw a record year for auction. 56 gigawatt were awarded globally. And the momentum continues with new emerging market joining the whole process of introducing new policies, new policy frameworks to kick off the offshore wind, especially around the Asia Pacific. That's why it give us the confidence of seeing a robust future, a robust outlook for offshore wind in the future. That's also why our forecast by end of this decade, we see the annual installation to be growing, ramping up significantly from the 8 gigawatt as of end of last year to 34 gigawatt by end of this decade, 2030. So enough of all the statistics, all the megawatt installations that gives you an overview of where we are. Then comes the fundamental question, why this technology? Why this technology is so important for energy transition? The answer lies in the scalability and the reliability of this technology. Among all the variable renewable technologies, this is the one that gives the highest capacity factor. It is 1/3 higher than that of the onshore wind and almost double that of the solar PV. That is why this is the technology give us the answers or the ultimate answers to the challenges of the VRE around the world. But offshore wind is more than just the scalability, the clean energy, and the reliability. It is also a catalyst for economic transformation. Around the world, we've seen many cases, especially in the coastal regions, of how much economic revitalization is being realized, is being brought in by the offshore wind industry. That is through the investment into the ports, the industrial clusters, and also the jobs being created around this industry. This is indeed the testimonial of renewable energy industry really bringing billions of investment and really bringing and shaping the future of the regional economies. Last year, we published a report, which is a Korean report, that is to look into and quantitatively assess how much socioeconomic benefits can really be brought in by the offshore wind development. We're also doing a similar study in the Philippines. By end of this year, hopefully we can show you some of the very good results there. And if we look into the wind energy, offshore wind development in Asia, the picture is also quite encouraging. Here in the Philippines, this year is going to be a milestone because we're going to see the GEA-5 to open to the offshore wind inclusion. And that also marks the first Southeast Asia country started to have auction in the, to have offshore wind in the auction. And in Vietnam, this year, beginning of this year, we saw the update of the power development plan. In there, we see the government continued and doubled down on their commitment to the offshore wind. The offshore wind target continue to be 6 gigawatt, but also increased with new scenario being added into the PDP-8. So the top number is now becoming 18 gigawatt by 2035. In Japan, 2 days ago, we saw the passage of the EEZ bill that will clear the road for the floating offshore wind going forward. And similar processes also happened a few months ago in Korea with the one-stop shop bill being passed, which had been tabled a few times in the National Assembly and stopped by different processes and finally passed last year. All these are positive signs, but the challenge remains. This is a sector that is highly capital intensive, and the LCOE is very, very sensitive to the cost of capital. And this is also the sector that is not immune from all these challenges on the microeconomics that is post-pandemic, post-war, and the increase of the interest rate, the inflation of the key materials, and also the disruptions on the supply chain. We're coming out of the worst time of that, but we're still not back to the pre-pandemic time. So all these challenges still remain to the industry. Then comes the other challenge. This is also, despite its scalability, all these good things about it, it also is the most complicated renewable energy projects. It has usually a very long development time, 6 to 8 years typically. And the developers has to deal with a long tail of all the different risks along the whole development processes at different stage. But the most important part is the regulatory risk, which is why there is a pressing need for us to look into that, to clear out all those regulatory risks and really, streamlining the permitting processes, put into the measures of the auction to ensure that enough risk sharing is being put there. So the auction that we see like being awarded 56 gigawatt globally is really like on the way of implementation. And all this will ultimately give and firm up the investor confidence and actually play a very important role on clearing up that perceived risk for the investors, which is very important because that will directly have an effect on the cost of capital. And then comes one piece of the very important part of the whole enabling piece of the policy, that's the supply chain. And I want to raise this because this is something that is quite crucial for this sector's like future scaling up, future development. To meet the ambitious target around the world for offshore wind, we need to significantly scale up the supply chain manufacturing capacity. And yet the other challenge is that the concentration. Now the existing supply chain is very much concentrated in a few geographies, including China. And given the current ongoing, very complex geopolitics kind of like landscape, it is the high time to be able to shield from this kind of like energy security risk, we need to talk about diversification. And regional diversification is the solution to that. And to that, Asia and ASEAN stands huge potential to step up providing that solution. what we envisage is a few industrial kind of supply chain hubs being established in Asia. That is the answer to that diversification needs. And that requires significant investment, the logistic network to be ready, and also most importantly, the trade environment to be open to allow this free product flow within the region. And in that way, that's how we see, that's the real kind of powerful real life application of how a truly regionalized collaboration can emerge under the context of energy transition. But to be there is a process. And I think that's also answer to the echoing to the theme of this year, which is regional collaboration. And I think the supply chain pieces really give an answer to that, of how that really can look like. And this regionalized wind energy supply chain also underpins really by collaboration, not the competition. And this is also underpinning our current thinking about our supply chain workstream planning, which is like on the one hand, to understand all the baseline of where things are at, where last year we published a report about the APEC supply chain baseline study. And this year, we are also going to start a collaboration with the ADB to start to look at the other missing pieces, like the critical mineral, where things are at. How is the trade dynamics look like for this kind of like collaborations? And parallel to that, we are also starting another piece of study, which is actually to look into the industrialization processes. If we are to really start this regional supply chain hubs, how do we do it? And how can we really bring the industrialized kind of like policy framework into the places, the same way as we introduce the offshore wind policy frameworks? That is the piece that we do not see a holistic answer yet. We keep referring to the UK sectoral deal, but we need a new solution that is presented to Asia. That's the piece of work that we're doing now. Hopefully in a year's time, we can show you the result of that. And parallel to that, later my colleague Janice will also show our finance workstream planning. And last, I want to come back to the energy transition. I think what we see now is a very good moving picture that energy transition is becoming among the Asia major economies, the consensus that by middle of this century, that high share of VREs will be composed or will be driving that energy transition. And this consensus or this vision is very much like, to me, very precious, but also very fragile. Precious because this is based on decades, 2 or 3 decades of climate advocacy, and also coupled with a historical moment of renewable energy finally come to a point that was so economically viable for large-scale implementation. But this energy transition vision is also very much fragile, because we can easily be stalled by the microeconomic headwinds, some of that I already mentioned, or by the rupture of the supply chain due to the geopolitics challenges, or by the challenges posed by the very industry that the energy transition trying to replace. That's why this is very challenging, this is fragile. And that's why also we're here today. We don't see this just as a technology forum. We see this as a partnership building, which we thank ADB for starting this relationship, which actually goes back a year ago, where we had a talk by the side of the piano. And also all this future plan of like working together on the supply chain piece of work. And, but this, what we need to do is a coalition building, it's an ecosystem building, so that we can really bring the solutions of scaling up the supply chain and the infrastructure, clearing out all the regulatory challenges, and really find the cheap and available finance to back all this scale up kind of requirements. That's why we're here, and thanks very much again, ADB, for inviting us to this partnership. And we look forward very much to the future and to see how we can unblock all these changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Li Ming, for these very inspiring remarks. I would like to welcome Mr. Pradeep Tarakan to the stage for his opening remarks. Pradeep has more than 20 years of professional experience in energy and environment And as Energy Transition Director at ADB's Energy Sector Office, he's responsible for guiding ADB's interventions in areas such as industrial decarbonization, critical minerals and clean energy supply chains, offshore wind development, and scaling up climate finance in the energy transition. Pradeep, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Sabrina. I must remember to update that photograph. I don't look like that anymore. A few years at ADB and see what happens. Good morning and welcome to the last and best day of ASIF. Thanks to our co-hosts, the Global Wind Energy Council, for their support for this event. And I'm grateful to all the speakers that are going to be participating today, to our panelists and to our participants for joining us today. And a big thank you to the team led by Ranishka, Sabrina, Shigeru, Cindy, I don't know if Cindy's in the room, Atsu, and all the others who've helped put this event together. So, as you're all aware, and you've been probably hearing throughout the week at the different sessions, is that Asia Pacific is at a crossroads. Fast-growing energy demand is coupled with the need to manage increasing climate vulnerability and exposure to disasters. As we strive to increase the percentage of renewable energy in the grid, we need to look beyond solar and onshore wind. We need to bring to play large capacities in offshore wind, tidal, wave, ocean thermal energy, and a combination thereof, wherever it makes sense. As you heard, offshore wind is technologically mature. There's almost 40 gigawatts of installed capacity in Europe alone. It's commercially viable, it's scalable at the utility level. And it can be a key enabler of the energy transition in coastal and island countries in particular. But as you heard, there is a lot of development in the pipeline, but there are also headwinds, so to speak. A lot of projects have been canceled in the last few years. There has been U-turns in many markets, and some countries such as India are still struggling to get their first projects off the ground. And I think what Liming mentioned is about complexity. Right? These projects are extremely complex, and that's an area where ADB does very well. We know how to manage and work and support complex projects. Under the same roof of this building, and within one balance sheet, we have a sovereign operation that works with governments and state-owned enterprises. We have a transaction advisory group, the Office of Market Development, and we have a private sector operation. So we're able to provide end-to-end support to our clients. These projects, as you know, require a lot of government interventions when it comes to land, to resource confirmation, to permitting, working with communities, fisher folk, farmers, coastal, users of coastal resources. You need large evacuation infrastructure, which is often shared. So you need government role there. You've got the private sector in terms of actually building the generation units. And so you have to bring both of them together, which means you need public-private partnerships, where you need transaction advisory, you need tendering, you need transparent contracting, and you need blended finance, where you have different pools of money coming together to take responsibility for different levels of risk, right? And have different return expectations. That's a classic, complicated playground where ADB excels. And so we're really keen to be able to support our clients to work on these sorts of projects. So the purpose of today's session is really to share lessons, experience, hear from all of you on offshore wind challenges that you're sort of facing in your countries. And what we hope to do is to really inform our activities in a few key markets. So Shigeru is working in the Philippines, trying to look at the sort of nexus of offshore wind and green ports. We have work going on in India, helping the government to put in place the right policies. As Jivek mentioned, we're embarking on a new study to understand supply chain opportunities in South and Southeast Asia for offshore wind development, and then link it backwards to the need for resilient critical mineral chains. And also linking it forward to see what are the opportunities for green skilling, for green jobs, for revitalization of our client economies. And what are the sort of regional cooperation opportunities that we can deliver on? With that, I just want to again invite you all to engage interactively. Open, insightful dialogue is what we're looking for. Let's build momentum together, and let's treat this as a community of practice that continues to sort of work with each other to enable an offshore wind future for the Asia Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep. Let me start the session by welcoming to stage Ms. Janice Cheong, Deputy Director GWEC Asia, for a keynote presentation on the cost narrative report launch for offshore wind. Janice has extensive private sector experience in technology industry, policy and security intelligence, and leads in GWEC's regional policy programs and advocacy and diplomacy initiatives, advancing the wind industry across Asia and the Pacific. Janice, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much once again to ADB for the opportunity to collaborate on this deep dive workshop today. Today, I will be launching our report. It's a very short report, but it's a policy paper that we have on financing offshore wind in the Asia-Pacific region, specifically assessing the cost competitiveness of offshore wind. This policy paper was born out of the need to better highlight the cost narrative that offshore wind projects face and take into account as well the unique characteristics and the nature of offshore wind. It's meant to highlight the cost reduction journey that an offshore wind project as well as market receives. It's also meant to debunk any myths about the long-term cost competitiveness of offshore wind. And offshore wind is indigenous to so many countries in the Asia as well as the Pacific. So it's really a call to action for all the stakeholders involved, whether you're a policymaker, a regulator, an investor, or a financial institution, to take this technology quite seriously as a long-term solution for energy security. Just a little bit about the Global Wind Energy Council. We are a nonprofit trade association with more than 1,500 companies in our network as members, across the wind value chain as well. Our work is separated primarily into two key pillars, the first one being policy advocacy, where we have country themes working on opening up new markets for wind energy. That's quite heavily focused on offshore wind now. We've got country programs in Philippines, Vietnam, as well as Korea, and soon to be Japan. Our regional programs center around how to get these policy accelerators and enablers to move a little bit quickly and help support the deployment of offshore wind as well. And that centers around finance, supply chain, as well as infrastructure. The finance work we are doing is a lot of partnership with institutional partners such as the ADB as well as the World Bank to try to find a way to have all these climate commitments at the top level be deployed into projects, either through blended finance and as well as lowering costs of capital. A little bit of snapshot, and Liming has already shared a good introduction for this. This was shared in our Global Wind Report that was launched in April, so just last month, 2 months ago now, in the IEA's Energy Security Summit, and also a little precursor for what is to come. So we have a Global Offshore Wind Report that will be launched the end of this month in Lisbon as part of our Global Associations platform. As mentioned here, we've already talked about how much new offshore wind was installed last year and how many gigawatts went into auctions and got wind capacity. But if you look at the countries and the spread here, Asia Pacific is a real growth market with South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan all holding auctions and awarding capacities. In our report, we measure costs through levelized costs of electricity. And the key drivers of offshore wind costs are really macroeconomic conditions, again, highlighted already, the increasing interest rate environment as well as inflation through the last few years have caused significant volatility, and we are no longer at the same kind of interest rates we were 5 years ago. Market maturity, so the strength of national offshore wind policies and regulatory frameworks, supply chain depth, as well as workforce capacity will directly influence the cost of LCOE, of offshore wind. Supply chains, infrastructure, clusters, industrial clusters, and also economies in scale will also affect LCOE. And lastly, with technological and innovation, we have ever increasing and improving turbine sizes as well as efficiency, optimization and installation. And a food for thought here is how does artificial intelligence as well as new technologies, emerging technologies impact this in the future? Looking a little bit in depth into macroeconomic conditions. Here, the two indicators that we use, the first one being secured overnight financing rate, which measures the cost of borrowing overnight. And the second one is commodity index by IMF, and this measures the price of commodities. Here, I really like to highlight that these are not technology specific, and all the volatility that we see here over the past 4 years due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, due to COVID-19, are not just experienced by one industry or one technology. These volatilities as well as price increases are all across the power sector and in all industries. However, we can see that stability has started to emerge, albeit cost challenges still existing. Here, markets have changed, and also policies will need to evolve accordingly, responding to external market conditions. When you look at market maturity, the maturity of policies, institutions, as well as infrastructure directly influences project risk and costs. There are unique characteristics of offshore wind projects that we have to highlight, including high capital expenditure early on. It's billions before even revenue flows. Longer development timelines, and also the multi-contracting nature increases the risks and financing complexity. I know complexity has been mentioned quite a few times, but again, reiterating that offshore wind has a level of complexity that we need to bear in mind. And how market maturity affects and shapes LCOE. If you have clear and stable regulation that reduces uncertainty and kind of increases investor confidence over a long period of time. Mature markets offer streamlined connection process and therefore contributes to limited curtailment. Established markets mitigate supply chain component delays and cost volatility as well. And again, skilled labor may also reduce installation and operations and maintenance costs. And lastly, when you look into more mature markets, local financial institutions have higher comfort levels and are more willing to engage. This diagram really captures, in essence, what we're trying to explain throughout the policy report, and that is the evolution of cost. If you see here on the left, the first few projects for offshore wind always cost relatively high. And as you develop policy regulatory frameworks, streamline permitting processes, design your remuneration mechanism, and you grow in experience and development, as well as establish either a domestic, but also looking at sub-regional and regional supply chains. After the 2 or 3 gigawatt development mark, then you move in from being a new market to an experienced market, therefore demonstrating a significant cost reduction. And now that is the diagram and the theoretical concept. Now I want to show you what has already been achieved in some of the mature markets. When you look at the United Kingdom and its offshore wind journey, you can see very clearly here over the 10 years that the last 10 years from 2014 to 24, there's been a reduction of 61.9% for LCOE. Of course, this was kind of hindered in the last 5 years with a 65% increase due to external market conditions. But here, I also wanted to highlight that policy reforms that are made from the regulators from allocation round 5 to the upcoming allocation round 7 has also demonstrated how market certainty has been supported through implementing policy changes regularly in an agile and flexible way, and how that has continued to support the lowering of LCOE. Germany and the Netherlands also follow similar trends. And this is to highlight that there is so much potential as well for this kind of cost reduction to be replicated in other regions, in other markets, including the Asia Pacific, as well as Latin America and in Africa. So what does this mean really for the Asia Pacific region? I'd like to highlight that policymakers are increasingly being responsive and introducing targeted measures to stabilize the sector amid difficult times that we have experienced macroeconomics, geopolitical, etc. In mature markets that I've shown you already, offshore wind maintains a strong cost competitiveness compared to other energy sources and other technologies. Despite ongoing capital intensity as well as the unique characteristics of offshore wind, it is well positioned to follow similar cost reduction pathways in the Asia Pacific region. And what this means and how to achieve this is firstly by growing its installed capacity, achieving economies of scale, regional collaboration in supply chains, as well as supportive and adaptive regulatory frameworks. In emerging markets and developing economies, some of the financial tools that are tangible and can take place include longer tenure and flexible repayment schedules to fit in with the characteristics of offshore wind, revenue contracts that may be hedged to external market conditions such as inflation, multilateral development bank support across the development cycle, as well as capacity building for local and regional financial institutions. Asia Pacific maintains a growth engine across various different markets that GWEC continues to work in. A lot of these are mentioned before already, but I wanted to highlight that in each market, we work quite closely with different stakeholders to try to support them in supporting them with international best practices, drawing in best practices from more mature markets, but also being willing to kind of adapt and tailor it to the regional context. This is the paper, so feel free to scan the QR code and have a read. Let me know if you have questions after the session. And lastly, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our flagship event that is happening in September in Melbourne, Victoria in Australia from 16th to the 18th of September. This year, the theme will be how to achieve sub-regional and regional supply chains, and Australia being an anchor of supply chain growth in the offshore wind industry. This event is both a commercial event, meaning there will be an exhibition, there will be heavy engagement from industry. At the same time, it's also going to be a political moment. This event is endorsed by the Victoria government, and we invite everybody here to attend the Melbourne event, and let me know if you have any questions. You can also buy your tickets here today. Okay, thank you very much.
Many thanks, Janice, for this very insightful presentation. We would move directly to the next presentation. Next to offshore wind, other marine renewable energy technologies are emerging and starting to play a role for island states and states with extensive coastal regions. I would kindly invite Dr. Michael Abundo, CEO of Ocean Pixel, a pioneer company dedicated to ocean renewable energy planning in Southeast Asia, to the stage. Mike has more than 20 years of experience as technopreneur in green and blue economy development. He will follow with the second keynote presentation on untapped alternatives, other marine renewable energy technologies.
Good morning. Thank you very much. And I think we have a little bit of catching up in terms of time to do. So let me... Okay, very good. So marine renewable energy sometimes often gets confused or swapped with, in terms of terminology, with ocean renewable energy or offshore renewable energy. So maybe let's define it, and let's take the European Science Foundation's definition of what marine renewable energy is, which is renewable energy production which makes use of marine resources or marine space. So offshore wind is marine renewable energy. It's not the only one in that family. There are other marine renewable energy technologies as well, such as marine floating solar is part of marine renewable energy, even marine biomass. And there is another subset, a huge subset, under marine renewable energy called ocean renewable energy. So this is where a family of ocean thermal energy, currents, waves, salinity gradients, and tidal range as resources that can be tapped. And we can see that people often get confused and they use ocean to mean offshore wind, they use marine to mean other things. So marine renewable energy has a spectrum of technology options. And yes, we can harness many, many things from marine environments and marine resources. So not just what's on top, which is wind, but also from the ocean itself. So we have currents, which could be ocean currents or tidal currents, thermal gradients, which is the hot water on top, cold water underneath. You could use ocean thermal energy conversion, OTEC. Waves, which is typically the disturbance on top of the water. You know, if you blow into a cup of liquid later you can try it with your coffee, you will see a disturbance, a ripple there. So those in large scale will be waves. And so that's why when you have strong winds, you typically will have some strong waves as well around the area. So here's an opportunity to hybridize certain systems. Salinity gradients, yes, the saltiness of the water, the difference in the saltiness of the water, you can also harness. This is already being applied in desalination systems for energy recovery. So you have saltwater brine, which is extremely salty, and the not so salty water, the sea, the difference could be harnessed using membranes, and you could extract energy as well. Tidal range has been there since the 1960s, and you have installations in Canada, UK, France, and now lately in Korea, the largest one, 254 megawatt. But investors have tried to move away from tidal range and tidal barrages because of the huge environmental impact that it causes. So, and techno-economically feasible tidal ranges would be 4 meters tidal range and up. So other countries near the equator, maybe countries like the Philippines, Indonesia would probably have lower tidal ranges. So technology needs to still improve there. That being said, we've heard about offshore wind already, so I'm not going to speak about our elder brother. So we'll speak about the other marine renewable energy alternatives. Looking at it from a technology readiness level, we know that offshore wind technology is already mature. But how come in this chart you have offshore wind stretching all the way down to early stages of the technology readiness level scale? That's because research and development never really stops. So you will need to do more and more improvements. Maybe new technologies will come out. Maybe new systems are also being tweaked. All these options of marine renewable energy technologies do have R&D as well. So it's not like they're located only in one particular TRL and that's it. So once you reach commercial, you stop doing R&D. Actually, not so. So these are just quote unquote indicative on average where the technologies are in terms of a comparative analysis. And you see that tidal range, offshore wind are commercial. Marine solar is quickly getting to commercial stage already. You have installations around the world, including small islands like Singapore, Tuvalu, Kiribati, supported by ADV in the Pacific Islands, are piloting marine floating solar already. And so marine floating solar does have TRL spectrum as well. Then other marine renewables like tidal stream energy are quickly gaining traction in the pre-commercial stage. Wave energy converters, OTEC, salinity gradients are following suit. There's a table here on your right side which shows plant capacity factor. Yes, it's true that offshore wind can reach up to 2 times as much capacity factor than solar. But there are also other marine renewables that reach the same level of capacity factor. In fact, if we look at OTEC, it could be baseload. So the capacity factor could be 90% to 95%. So why aren't we exploring this? Well, we are, right? These are emerging technologies that we should continue to explore. And our colleagues in Japan and Korea have now solved the huge cost of the deep ocean water pipe, because that was one of the huge costs. In the US, Hawaii has been already doing pilot and operations of OTEC systems in a facility, and yet we do need to move from 1 to 10 megawatt to maybe 100 megawatts in order for the costs to really make sense. So the other technologies have a different cost trajectory as well. And in this slide, you'll see a left chart and a right chart. The left chart shows you an ambition of where the Ocean Energy Forum would like to see the development of ocean energy technologies, from demonstration to pre-commercial and then industrial rollout. As we all know, in energy practice, it's not about the years. It's actually to get the costs down and to reach, commercial deployment or industrial rollout. It's not how long you've been doing things and speaking about it or making the ecosystem, or growing the ecosystem. Those are all important. But on the right-hand side, you see cumulative capacity. So as you have more deployments, that's where you really see costs going down. it's like on-the-job training, right? So the more you learn on the job by deploying things, the better it is that you can actually bring down the costs. And then economies of scale come into play. So you see where tidal energy is sort of between the 10 to 16 megawatts, so slowly increasing, but yet it's a different approach. For offshore wind, being a mature technology and who have crossed the, what was it, 3 gigawatt, 4 gigawatt mark that was mentioned earlier, and now it's sort of reaching 40 gigawatt of installed capacity. It's now down at that scale of like the learning curve has started to bottom out, right? Whereas the early stage technologies are still going down this learning curve. And so we're experiencing what, around 10 to 20 US cents per kilowatt hour, even at capacities less than 10 megawatt for tidal in-stream energy already. And that says a lot. So in the Philippines in particular, we're familiar with this chart, or this map on the left, where offshore wind resource has been mapped. And maybe we're not so familiar with some of the charts on the right. So there was an estimated ocean renewable energy potential, which excludes, again, as a subset, excludes offshore wind, excludes marine solar or marine biomass, just ocean renewable energy. The DOE, coupled with some academic institutions, estimated that there might be 170 gigawatts of ocean renewable energy potential. To break that down, tidal in-stream energy, practically extractable, already was estimated to be between 40 to 60 gigawatts in certain locations primarily. But OTEC and WAVE have yet to be estimated. So maybe it's not 170. Let's see. In terms of marine solar, we already have 266 gigawatt peak just by taking 1% of the bay areas around the country that you could put marine solar. That's more than the offshore wind resource estimate, but we don't have yet a roadmap, technology, policy, maybe even other mechanisms to support marine solar just yet. But I know things are in the works. And this is where government and financial institutions could really work together. So now that we have this information that there could be other marine renewables as well in the countries that we're working in, then we should start talking about them holistically. Offshore wind, being part of the family of marine renewable energy, is already at the forefront facing the headwinds. So tools like marine spatial planning, considerations for environmental impact assessment, and other policy regimes, even rates, right? That's good because that's the first mover, and yet we need a fast set of fast followers. And to take marine spatial planning as an example, I do hope that our colleagues in the room do not just plan for one technology when we look at marine spatial planning. All the data marine spatial planning involves could be utilized also by other marine renewables. The supply chain that's getting established by our offshore wind colleagues could be used as well by other marine renewables. And there are synergies there, which is good news because when we develop these infrastructure, supply chains, and other capabilities, more and more technologies are going to be able to proliferate. And that's good, not only for the energy sector, but for the wider blue economy development of countries. In terms of these emerging technologies or other marine renewable energy technologies, we do see that since they're not yet in the commercial scale, we may need to take a progressive development pathway. This approach starts off with markets that are willing to pay for energy that may not be as cheap as grid scale electricity. So start with which markets then? Off-grid markets, small-scale applications. So these markets are already being powered by expensive diesel generation. So if you could be a little bit cheaper than diesel, equal to or a little bit cheaper, there's already a business case, a commercial business case for small-scale marine renewable energy technologies, especially then if you hybridize it with commercial tech like onshore solar or maybe marine marine solar and onshore solar combined, and other marine renewable energy technologies like tidal, if you work that off, you'll probably reach something like 10 to 15 US cents per kilowatt hour, which is going to be cheaper than the diesel alternative in off-grid islands ranging from 1 to 5 megawatt. So that should be something that we take and progress into then more and more replicable sites, then progress them to large-scale installations going to the grid-tied markets, large-scale commercial projects. Here's an example, a live example considered in islands, small island developing states, Pacific, Maldives, archipelagic countries, Singapore, Indonesia, and the Philippines, which we have been helping project developers embark on. So the basic would be just look at solar, onshore, offshore, and then look at something else. Is there tidal stream? Is there wave? So for areas with tidal currents, then they could put tidal in-stream energy technologies. The preference right now is to look at floating systems because developing countries believe that it's easier to maintain if you could see and access it, and basically have people not be experienced in like underwater operations so much. And you could have applications beyond just telco. You could have things that are needed by islands, right? Be it electric boat charging, you could have ice making for the fisher folk, desalination systems, so for water, and other things needed by island industries, not only for tourism, but for other things. So just as an example here, if you had a 10 kilowatt load that you needed to power, for instance, and you would consider maybe just marine solar, marine floating solar, then I need a lot of space, 140 square meters here, and I'd establish maybe 20 kilowatt peak. If I do just tidal energy, maybe it's smaller space, and I'd establish 40 to 100 kilowatt peak. The answer is not one or the other, but in the hybrid. The hybrid gives you optimization in space and size and also costs. Therefore, your levelized cost of energy will be somewhere in the middle of these two options. We've done a project in Indonesia, and you can see how rudimentary this setup is. It's taking advantage of local supply chain. They have a barge, they know how to do cabling from 100 meters offshore, near shore, let's say, all the way to the island. But they said, we don't want to do underwater cable because we don't know how to do that, and that's expensive. We'll just do a pile and basically through the air, transfer the energy from this floating platform back to our small island, which is currently operating 3 megawatts of diesel. So they started hybridizing their system using small scale, 70 kilowatt tidal energy, just because they wanted to see what other energy sources they can harness for this small island. And in terms of what that cost would be, it's already cheaper than the diesel alternative, which was 50 US cents per kilowatt hour. We may bring it down to less than 37 cents per kilowatt hour by doing a setup of tidal, solar, and battery. And we see the same, and as you scale that, you'll have lower and lower costs. In fact, if we look at the studies around this part of the world, you'll probably end up with something closer to like 10 to 15 US cents per kilowatt hour. So where are we in terms of what we need to do? We're gonna not think of large scale untapped marine renewable energy alternatives yet. So offshore wind can go very large scale, gigawatt scale. For other marine renewable energy alternatives, we need to have that large-scale ambition and vision, but we need to start with pilots that are manageable in terms of risks and other things. So we do combined and productive uses of energy. This is an example that the Emerging Areas team has shown yesterday in the cross-sector session. There's already projects looking at marine floating solar to look at other applications, and therefore a synergy there. Well, you could hybridize that already with other marine renewable energy sources beyond marine floating solar. I can't put 1 megawatt of offshore wind here because the cost will just be too expensive, right? So it needs to be larger. But for other technologies, it might make sense. As a summary, marine renewable energy options do exist, and beyond offshore wind and marine solar, which are already commercial, we can look at things like tidal currents, waves, and OTEC. Other emerging marine renewable energy technologies, but there is a need for us to look at where the resources and inventory, where the market is, and what price point. So with these three parameters, we can then enable the key next steps and support the industry of marine renewable energy to take off, developing the same sort of roadmap as our big brother offshore wind, supply chain, market mechanisms, and other synergies. In diversity, there is prosperity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Our next agenda point is a panel discussion on the most mature and commercially viable marine renewable energy technology, offshore wind. Kindly allow me to welcome the moderator, Mr. Renishka Vimalasena, a senior energy specialist at Asian Development Bank. He has over 22 years of professional experience, including in policy formulation, promotion of renewable energy, energy infrastructure development, and mobilizing climate finance. Please, Renishka.
Thank you, Sabrina. I was thinking whether I should also change my photo like Pradeep wanted to, but I will leave it to you to decide. Let's start the panel discussion. Let me introduce the panelists and invite them on stage when I introduce them. Start with the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Energy in the Philippines, Mylene Kapankol. She has nearly 4 decades of experience, has been instrumental in driving development strategies and reforms in the power and the renewable sector. As a DOE secretary, assistant secretary, she primarily oversees the development and the execution of critical and innovative policies, plans and the programs, especially renewable energy. She has also played a key role in bringing into forefront offshore wind development and smart grid for the Philippines. She found the correct place, I guess. Let me invite Anne Margaret Francisco, Philippine Country Manager from GVAC. Anne is a seasoned energy industry professional with over 17 years of experience across power sector, including wind, hydro, solar, and the list goes on. She is currently serving as the country manager for GVAC in the Philippines and actively shapes industry policies and contributes to the growth of the renewable energy sector. Ben Karoxi, he's the partner, energy and infrastructure for Norton Rose Fulbright. Ben is a project and structured finance specialist who advises his clients on the development and financing of renewable energy and low carbon infrastructure projects around the world. Ben has advised on some of the foremost transactions in the energy transition space, spanning offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, battery storage, gas to power, energy, hydrogen, and carbon capture. Let me invite Cheon Hong. She's the Key Account Director, Goldwind Asia. Wang is the Key Account Director who leads strategic partnership with major renewable energy developers across the world. She has over 15 years of international experience, worked in Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East. She played a key role in developing Argentina's 350 megawatt greenfield wind project and has led localization and market strategies in both Korea and Saudi Arabia. She holds a master's in public administration from Columbia University. Sean Whitaker, Global Head Offshore Wind SMAP, and Principal Wind Specialist of the IFC. Sean is a mechanical engineer and Principal Wind Specialist with the World Bank Group. He's the co-founder of the Offshore Wind Development Program, which has since 2019 worked to accelerate the uptake of offshore wind in 25 countries. Prior to joining IFC in 2011, Sean served as the Vice President of the Canadian Wind Energy Association and also worked as a Senior Energy Specialist and a Project Developer with ICF Consulting. So let's move on to the panel discussion. Let me go around with the panelist with a simple question at the front. First one, just to introduce yourself, what you do in the offshore space, but also if you can let us know, because earlier it was mentioned by previous speakers, offshore wind has highest capacity factor in the range of 40-45, and the LCOE is coming down. But also Dr. Abundo mentioned that there are other technologies which has higher capacity factors. So why offshore wind? Maybe I can start from Anne.
Thank you, Renishka. Maybe an introduction to GWEC, just to supplement what my colleagues Liming and Janice already said. So we represent the industry globally, and really the mission is to accelerate wind, particularly offshore wind, and emphasize this as a key enabler in the whole energy transition ambition. We have regional works which span finance, supply chain, collaboration, and industrial policy, but also we work in emerging countries such as Philippines, Vietnam, Korea, and Japan. And it's really to work with the government, understand the gaps in terms of policy frameworks, and how we can fill the gaps. So that's what we are doing here in the Philippines. We work with the Department of Energy, the private stakeholders, and even the financial institutions to really mobilize and roll out auction, a properly designed auction, understand infrastructure needs such as the ports and grid, and as Janice mentioned, how we can further unlock capital to deploy offshore wind. That said, perhaps the answer to your question on why offshore wind, I guess other than the argument for capacity factor, what we're also amplifying is the need for diversification. It's not for GWEC to say offshore wind is the only way and is not just the solution, but there is a pathway to ensure that the available indigenous resources are actually applied, are actually mobilized. And to us, the whole gap finding is also understanding what's available in the Philippines, what's available in Vietnam, and perhaps there's a solution to ensure that these available technologies are also mobilized. So it's us working with other marine technologies available and also understanding from DOE if there are available frameworks to make it happen. So it's about complementing what offshore wind can provide, understanding the timeline, how long it will take to mobilize, and maybe we understand other marine renewables. These technologies can be mobilized faster, for example, than offshore wind. So to us, we believe in the technology offshore wind, but also will call for a diverse portfolio, and we all want the same thing: a faster transition to cleaner energy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good morning, and it's wonderful to be here. Thank you to ADB and GWEC, and of course also to distinguished guests. So I'm a partner at Norton Rose Fulbright, and we're a law firm who's really been involved in offshore wind globally since the beginning. So my heritage, much like the firms in offshore wind, is from Europe and the UK, and I think from that sort of European and UK base, very much like our clients, the investors and developers and also financiers of this technology, it's slowly been exported around the world to the US and now most relevantly and excitingly APAC. So to sort of address the question straight on why offshore wind, I think the capacity factor analysis is certainly a key consideration, but I think when you balance the capacity factor aspect also with the scalability and the provenness of the technology, it becomes quite an exciting technology from a potential perspective. we've heard the word complexity a lot today, and I think that's something that I can certainly attest to looking at the projects that have been delivered around the world, that the contracting structures are incredibly complex, the procurement structures are complex, and also the need for collaboration and for real partnership with government, but across a variety of sectors. I mean, the interesting thing about offshore wind, as distinct from other clean energy technologies, is the myriad of different areas of infrastructure and public policy it touches, from grid and ports that we've just heard about, right through to energy policy design and auction design and support frameworks to support and unlock financing solutions through long-term offtake. But to sort of to countenance, I think, the complexity point and really to sort of to demonstrate why we see so much potential for this technology in APAC, is that solutions have been found to a lot of these challenges. And the overwhelming story of the sector, if you look at projects that have been delivered, is positive. You know, there are stories out there that have perhaps had more press than than we would like as a sector about challenges, and I think that's true of most sectors. But if you look at gigawatts online and projects that are in the water in markets like Europe that are sort of at the more mature end of the scale, they're all performing incredibly well and delivering successfully for their economies.
Yeah. Thank you, Reniska, and good morning, everyone. First of all, we would like to thank the Asian Development Bank and the GWEC for organizing this panel discussion, solely actually to help the Department of Energy as well in gathering information, exchange notes on how we will proceed with the offshore wind development. By the way, I'm Maylene Kapongkol. I'm the Assistant Secretary, and I'm assisting the Department of Energy in development of renewable energy in the country. Why offshore? One, we were triggered by a study undertaken by the World Bank and SMAP regarding the offshore wind roadmap in the country, wherein it came out that there is huge potential for offshore wind capacity in the country, having 178, but the most challenging is about 160 are floating offshore wind. And elsewhere, there's not much movement yet on the floating, but we're still pursuing it because of the capacity factor, the renewable energy goals of the Department of Energy, where we wanted to achieve 35% renewable energy share in the power generation mix by 2030 and increase it to 50% share by 2040. So that's the main factor why we wanted offshore wind. It's novel, and what we have been experiencing right now is both mixed emotion or mixed, because we did not realize that it's quite difficult. It's so easy to develop a roadmap, identify the change, the work supply, the policies, but at the end of the day, I have realized that offshore wind development is quite unique. It would take a whole of government and a whole of nation approach. And of course, with an outside sourcing of expertise, we are confident that with all experts here and those that are beside me here as panelists, we will be able to hurdle the challenges of having offshore wind, no? Because we're also looking into cross-border exchanges with our neighboring countries, and of course, investment. No? The Philippines has the necessary or has prepared a market mechanism for offshore wind and renewable energy. Also, Prof. Abundo is looking at me and saying, Marine, no, we're doing the tidal stream as well with the assistance of Dr. Mike and the Mitigation Action Facility. So we also have the floating solar. But we know that offshore wind is quite huge in the Philippines, and being an archipelagic country, we can capitalize on these available resources with the support of our development partners, our associations, and other experts. in the industry. Thank you.
Sean.
Yeah, thank you. I remember Asek Mylene when we were on a boat in the going to visit the Anholt wind farm in Denmark in 2022 as part of a study tour, and it's amazing to think how far the Philippines has come since then. And so it's certainly hats off to you and your colleagues. I wanted to put in well, so I'm Sean Whitaker with the World Bank. So we've been working, our program has been in place since 2019. We worked with 26 countries so far. Our work is really focused on 8 countries, so Vietnam, Philippines, Sri Lanka, India, Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, and Colombia. And I wanted to put in a plug for a report that we just released called Making Offshore Wind Work, which is an update to our report on key factors for successful development of offshore wind in emerging markets. And this Making Offshore Wind Work is predicated on these 4 pillars that have to be in place in order for offshore wind to, to thrive in a given country. The first is strategy, the second is policy, the third is frameworks, and the fourth is delivery. And so the first column there, strategy, gets to this question about why you would pursue offshore wind. And it's really interesting because it's in all the countries where we work, I would say that every country has a different reason for doing it. We often cite LCOE or capacity factor, but in a lot of countries, that's really not the main thing that they're looking for. Ultimately, they do want it to be a cost competitive part of their energy mix, and it is. But in Brazil, where we're doing a lot of work, their main interest is in having offshore wind balance the interannual variability of hydro. They have real problems with hydro. It goes up and down from year to year. And what you find with offshore wind is it doesn't go up and down year to year. It's actually extremely constant. So they use offshore wind as a hedge against hydro. Another place in Vietnam, just next door, it's energy independence. Vietnam does not have a lot of indigenous energy sources. It's got gas and it's got a lot of wind. And so they're mainly pursuing it as a way of trying to reduce their energy imports. In other places, yeah, so energy security, in other cases, it's development of local jobs and economic drivers. Brazil, this is a big thing. They have an industry that they're trying to sustain. So every country does it for a different reason. And what we always say in the Making Offshore Wind Work report is you have to understand what those drivers are, and then develop policies that correspond to why you're doing it in the first place. But be very clear about why you're doing it in the first place, because there are many different reasons for it. But ultimately, it can be a part of the energy landscape from an electron standpoint, from an environmental and social standpoint. There's many boxes that you can check. So this is part of the challenge in a given country. And what we've been doing since 2019 is trying to help figure out why you're doing it and how, once you figured out why you're doing it, what are the policies you need and the frameworks and the delivery you need to actually make it a reality. Because not every country is like surrounds the North Sea. They're all in different contexts. So.
Thank you. Jill?
Hello, my name is Yun Huang, and I'm a Key Account Director, Golden Asia. So Golden is a leading wind turbine OEMs, and we have the largest market share in China over a decade. And also we have the largest market share in the world over the 3 consecutive years. So why offshore? So actually, everyone already pointed out what I would like to address. So, but actually, land is very limited. So a lot of countries actually has very limited spaces for onshore wind turbine projects. So like South Korea, high population density country, they are moved forward to offshore because simply they do not have enough land for onshore. And that at the same time, offshore cost is already problem, and technology-wise, it's already problem. So that's a reason why China's accumulative offshore capacity exceeded 35 gigawatt. So I believe that offshore wind has a lot of potentials, not only for supply chains, but also energy security in many other countries.
Thank you. So let's probably start from the beginning. If a country wants to develop offshore wind roadmap or offshore wind for that matter, maybe I start with the initial step, which is developing a plan and probably a roadmap. I also want to quote what Isaac Mylin said, developing a roadmap is easier, but it has to be done. So let's start with Sean, because you have developed 8 wind roadmaps across the world. What does it mean to develop a wind roadmap, and why it is required at the forefront of this development cycle?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, one of my favorite sayings is a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And on offshore wind, there's a lot of links. You look at from a technical, commercial, environmental, and social standpoint. And if you get any of these wrong, then the rest of them don't really matter. For example, last year we released a report on community benefit sharing and the engagement of fishing communities and of communities that are affected by offshore wind. And we've seen this in many places. If you do not get that right, then you can have capacity factors 70%, you can have the best conditions, but if the population goes like, nope, then that's a real issue. So I think what happens with the roadmaps is it kind of tries to establish all these things that have to happen at once to make sure that you don't have a weak link. Because yeah, if you miss out on any of these, then it's critical. So yeah, I'd say that's the need to map things out, and it would be interesting to get Asek Mylin's view on this, because this is we released the Philippines roadmap in 2022, I think. It took us a year and a half to develop with the DOE, and the Philippines is like a living example of implementation and the difference between the theory and the practice. So I'd be curious to if I can pass it over to Asek Mylin and ask what her experience has been in that implementation.
Yeah, I'll come back to Isaac Marlin on the same question. And also, when a development partner like World Bank or ADB is helping you to develop this roadmap, there is a huge role from the governments also. And not only during the development, but also taking it forward. Would like to hear that, how Philippines have gone through that process over the last couple of years, and you have arrived to this stage about to be optioned. So would like to hear that story.
Thank you, Ranishka. As mentioned by Sean here, when we did the roadmap in 2022, we only have around a very few service contracts awarded. But we did not distinguish yet the offshore wind from the onshore. So that's why if you can look at the record, it is West Wind Energy Service Contract. So after that study tour we had, and then there were sharing of technology development, including understanding what really is offshore wind being developed in a particular jurisdiction. We see that this is not solely a DOE initiative. We cannot do it alone. So when we come back from that study tour, we recommended to the secretary that I guess we need to come up with an interagency technical working group composed of various government agencies to be led by the Department of Energy, solely to have a more orchestrated development plan for offshore. And we're happy that the President has been supportive of this offshore wind. And what he did was to issue an executive order that solely touched on the requirement for all permitting agencies to come up with the process on how the offshore wind, because this is quite new in the country. There's no existing guidelines, there's no standards to speak of. even the DOE doesn't know how to handle it. No, so with the support, of course, and as we move towards developing an in-depth study of what an offshore wind, then we came up with a revised omnibus guidelines for the award of the service contract. Imagine when we start before the launch of the 2022 roadmap, I guess we only have 3 offshore wind contracts awarded. But after that, and right now, we have more than 80 offshore wind with a potential capacity of about 65 gigawatt, much, much higher than what we can absorb as a country. So that's why we're looking at cross-border sharing of energy, which is quite happening nowadays. And we will be coming up with an auction program as what Ms. Liming reported, that by third quarter, we will do our auction round. Slowly, we will take it for the fixed bottom technologies. The ERC, and with the help of ADB, has rendered technical assistance on the development of regulatory framework for offshore wind. So we're now doing some design that will de-risk some of the investment, and we thank, of course, ADB, World Bank, and GWEC for continuously guiding the Department of Energy on what we believe will be more appropriate. So on the part of the Department of Energy, as you know, the power sector is privately investors driven sector. The government is no longer into investment in the power or in the energy sector. So we heavily rely on the private sector investment, to pursue this project. So we do continuous coordination with other agencies, so that all the key or not the weak link, but the links to developing the offshore wind will have to be addressed and properly delivered by the permitting agencies, by all agencies, including the private sector. So you can see that our auction number 5 is dedicated for offshore wind, and you can see the innovations we have done because of this partnership with all other experts. Thank you.
Thank you, Esik Malin. So probably the next link in the chain is how do you structure offshore wind projects? Financing is part of it, but not only the financing, but the structuring. Ben, you have been doing this over the last years. And why it is important, the correct structuring, and also probably bring out some successful stories and lessons for Philippines, India, and the other countries who wants to structure new projects.
Yeah, sure. So I'll try and keep this as succinct as possible because there are so many moving parts. But I think the way to conceptualize it is almost into 3 buckets. So you've got the fundamentals of the offtake structure. You've got the fundamentals of the procurement and the contracting structure. And then wrapping all of that is ultimately your financing package. And I think we've heard writ large today the capital intensiveness of offshore wind, which basically means, and also the importance of the private sector, which basically means access to low cost and efficient project finance has been an absolute fundamental to the development of offshore wind around the world. On the topic of auctions and structuring, we've seen a number of different products deployed in different markets to support offshore wind, ranging from feed-in tariff structures to more financial contracting style arrangements like CFDs, but I think also, frankly, like the REPA. And I think that distinction between, is this fundamentally a PPA and an offtake arrangement, or is this a market that is liberalised and therefore can support different forms of support mechanisms like CFDs is important. And then from that underpinning, it's a case of analysing from an offtake perspective the creditworthiness of the offtake arrangement, the tenor of the offtake arrangement, and also alternate routes to market. That's a key analysis that banks will do. And if there are limited alternate routes to market, then that's a key risk item that needs to be mitigated. On the contracting piece, I think, we heard it in Janice's presentation, multi-contracting is one of the unique features of offshore wind. And I think what's interesting in APAC is and this sort of dovetails into the next topic around blended finance and finance structuring, is there is a real need from a finance perspective to blend international commercial bank capital. They're bringing the experience of the technology, the multi-contracting structures and the finance packages, but also with the MDBs, the ADBs, the IFCs, the ECAs, who've been very, very strongly supporting offshore wind in Europe and in other markets. But also the local liquidity is very important. And so this journey of blended finance and of helping to unlock the various pools of capital which are collectively required for offshore wind is important. And that's where, from a procurement perspective, understanding and demonstrating how multi-contracting structures have evolved, but also why they're fundamentally bankable, which they are challenging, but they are bankable. And I think there is a tendency, if I can say this candidly, to sort of look at the way a lot of the offshore wind projects and financing arrangements have been structured in mature markets and say they're quite sponsor friendly. And I think I would agree, they are quite sponsor friendly in terms of how they've been structured. But in saying that, I think in some respects they're also inherently project friendly, because I think when you look at the risk allocation that multi-contracting places on a project, it's not a case where if you've got a wrap TPC arrangement, you can, a milestone is missed, you sue for liquidated damages, that underwrites your cost of debt implications. This is an arrangement that the project itself has to self-solve. There are interface risks that are introduced. The project needs to ultimately be able to manage in concert with its lenders. And so getting these balances right within the financing packages and ensuring that there's sufficient flexibility to adapt as conditions change, but also importantly that there are sufficient controls to ensure that lenders have got the controls they require to deliver the financing is quite a keen and unique balance to the offshore wind space.
Thank you. Let me move on to Cheong. So the next piece is the technology, and being the market leader for Chinese development. And the innovation and the technological improvements that you have seen over the last years, which actually drives this offshore wind development because of the higher capacity factors, higher yield of energy. If the audience can hear from you the development of this technology and what is to expect in the next years.
Yes. Our offshore wind technology, especially, there are a lot of innovations specifically in developing offshore wind turbine. So over the decades, actually, Gold and ourselves, we use PMDD technology, which is permanent magnet direct drive. This offers high efficiency, low maintenance, and higher reliability in harsh and offshore conditions. But as offshore wind turbine becomes larger and larger, PMDD technologies face two challenges. One is higher cost, which a lot of developers and especially developing countries are very sensitive, and also heavier weight. That's a reason why actually we, technology developers, providers, developed MSPM, which is medium speed permanent magnet turbine technology. So by incorporating a small medium speed gearbox, this actually reduce cost and weight. So this makes not only our turbine easier to install and transport, but also maintain low maintenance cost and high efficiency, benefits from the PMDD. So this is one of the greatest innovation that we've recently achieved. Yeah, and also as you can see, especially in China, we are we have a lot of deep sea project like floating offshore platforms, specifically like in provinces in Guangdong areas.
Thank you. I have a lot of other questions. We haven't discussed the safeguards, we haven't discussed the supply chain, we haven't discussed the infrastructure, evacuation. But in the interest of time, that I will pause here with my questions, but would like to take one or two questions from the audience quickly if someone wants to ask a question from this esteemed panelist. There are mics here.
Thank you very much. I'm Pierre Noël. I'm a senior energy advisor for the Tony Blair Institute. I'm pleased to see you, Asek Kapongol. We've had the pleasure of supporting DOE as well. No, I put my question in the app. I don't know if it's gone through, but I wonder if there's not a bit of an elephant in the room about the cost of offshore wind. As Asek said, a roadmap is very easy to do, but delivering is eventually about the cost of it, not only in absolute terms, but in relative terms. So in the Philippines now, as we speak, large-scale solar plus battery to deliver a 8 hours a day, nearly a gigawatt of mid-merit, dispatchable, zero carbon electricity is contracted commercially for $100 per megawatt hour. The most optimistic views of offshore wind would be twice that, and I think that's too optimistic. So is that not the big blocker? Is that not the obvious thing that should be discussed?
Thank you. Asik Marlin, you want to take the question?
Well, it's part of the discussion on what will be the appropriate tariff, for offshore wind. That's why the ERC has been getting some technical assistance and guidance on what would be the appropriate amount of the gear price, the reserve pricing that we will apply for the offshore wind round, which will happen this year. Aside from that, we are trying to de-risk some of the investors' investment by way of designing an auction program that will provide certainties and clarities. So there is also a government commitment to that effect. Like there should be ports at the time you deliver your committed capacity. There should be transmission line that will be able to connect readily. So all the necessary policy and regulatory framework should be present before the commercial operations. And we are now innovating, like for example, for the requirement for the performance band from a previous 20% of the project, we know that there are phases in which offshore wind is being developed. So initially we put a 2%, and then we reduce it as the offshore wind developer is performing its mandate or work program. So that way we mitigate the risk that our investors, so it's both the government and the investors committing on certain aspect of the offshore wind development. But as to the pricing, we defer it to the Energy Regulatory Commission.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, let's try to wind up this panel discussion. We will let the panelists go. I will have one last question, but we won't let you go out of the ADB building so the audience can ask questions from these esteemed panelists. The question for all the panelists, very quickly, probably within 30 seconds, what's next in the offshore development? May I start with Shewang?
What's next? Uh, oh, it's pretty much a difficult question for me right now. Actually, for us, the most important thing is always policy. So stable and transparent and long-term policies for offshore wind. Specifically as an OEM, so without stable and transparent policy, actually we cannot go to the market. It means that we cannot contribute, localize offshore market and increase offshore energies right now. So, from our side, very clear capacity target, permitting processes and structures, and grid strategy are the most important things. So yeah, this is the next thing. This is very essential, but the most important thing that I would like to emphasize. Thank you.
Sean?
Yeah, I'd say in the short term, it's getting the details right on this GF5, which the entire world is watching, getting it out, keeping it simple, get it right. But at the same time, looking at the longer term, it's trying to figure out what this industry looks like in the Philippines in 10 years' time. And floating is going to be there, and we have to work together to figure out how to crack that nut.
Well, I already mentioned that for the Philippines, next is, of course, the conduct. The preparations are now ongoing in the conduct of the auction round for offshore wind. So wait for maybe July that we will issue the notice of auction and the terms of reference. So that's it. And of course, the capacity and the technology. But I already mentioned that it will be fixed bottom. Thank you.
And I think I'd just echo the comment around stability. I mean, in terms of evolutions, I think more blended finance models will become interesting. And then on the technology side, we're watching developments in floating offshore wind and also Chinese OEMs very closely.
Thanks. And you have an additional question also. The GBEX role, because bringing all these parties together in a development country, that's very crucial. I just want to ask your role, and how important that role is, and the last question is, what's next?
Probably I'll answer the what's next first because it also amplifies GUX goals. Three things. Pipeline. We need the signal not just to the developers, but also to the supply chain and to the financial institutions on the capacity build out. It has to be clear. It has to send a message globally what's going to happen in an emerging market like the Philippines. Second, invest in infrastructure. In as much as developers would want to commit to the capacity, we need grid, we need the supply chain, and we need ports to make it happen. And third, regional collaboration, share knowledge. This is something I want to really emphasize because what we do here in the Philippines, we form a technical working group. We work with the banks, we work with the developers, but we also rely on our institutional partners, where our ADB, multilaterals, World Bank, other firms that could supply that knowledge. Where is the gap? How we could fill the gap? And also cross-border collaboration. So, and these three things are our pillars on how we operate in an emerging market like the Philippines. We create that platform to bridge the gap and send that message to the government on how we can scale further, on what makes the auction bankable, on what makes the developers really focus on, for example, the Philippines, and really create a market that will not just be for the next 3 years or so. We want to go beyond the 2028 target. We want to see a pipeline wherein we will transition from fixed to floating and realize the vision as mentioned in the report from the World Bank. So to us, we bring what we can from our global expertise and really bring it down to the country level, not just national, agencies like DOE, but even subnational. And we try to add a layer of including the community in the discussion as well. So in as much as we want to create policies and frameworks, communities shouldn't be left behind. So they're part of the conversation. We understand the needs from the fisher folks, from the coastal communities, and we also amplify that this is not just about the gigawatts added, but also the socio-economic benefit from implementing and deploying more offshore wind in the country. So yeah.
Thank you very much for this expert panel, for answering the questions, but also leaving out a lot of unanswered questions because of the time limitation, not because of anything else. But thank you so much again. As I mentioned earlier, the audience have the opportunity to meet you and have the questions clarified. Once again, thank you so much, and a round of applause for the extreme panelists. Over to you, Sabrina. Just wait for a while. We will have to wrap up the session.
Yeah. Shall we do the... Okay. Thank you, distinguished speakers and dear Renishka, for the insightful discussion. We would now like to introduce the last speaker for today for closing remarks on this session. Mr. Priantha Vijayatunga has over 35 years of professional experience, including 17 years in the halls of ADB. He is Senior Energy Sector Director and has extensive experience in energy policy and regulation, energy planning, and clean energy development. To name only a few of the many leading roles in the energy sphere, he served as Founder Director General of Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka and Senior Professor of Electrical Engineering at University of Marathuwa. Please, Priantha.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Sabrina. Ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude our deep dive workshop on marine renewable energy and role of offshore wind in catalyzing sustainable development, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to each of you, our speakers, the panelists, just concluded panel, the participants, for your valuable contributions. Your active participation and the candid dialogue have made this session a success. That's, of course, you could see that from the panel discussion, vibrant discussion you had, and a lot of insightful thoughts. And today's discussions have illuminated the immense potential of our oceans as a sustainable energy source and the collaborative efforts required to harness this potential effectively. We have explored innovative technologies from tidal and wave energy systems to offshore wind. These advancements not only promise to diversify our energy mix, but also offer resilient solutions for remote and island communities, enhancing energy security and economic development. Offshore wind is no longer optional. It is essential achieving clean energy transition we all envision. It holds the key to unlocking large-scale, reliable, and renewable power, particularly in Asia and the Pacific, where demand is growing rapidly and coastal resources are abundant. At the same time, we have to keep in mind what one of the questions, persons in the audience asked, the cost. At the end of the day, the cost will have to be reflected in the consumer tariffs, and we have to make sure that we have to give affordable power to the communities we serve. But at the same time, our resources are limited, the land is limited, and we may have to look at offshore wind. It's on a case-by-case basis, of course. If you have enough land, that's a different story. But I think eventually, offshore wind is not optional. It's going to be a necessity at one point or the other. But for offshore wind to truly catalyze sustainable development, we must act with both urgency and strategy. 3 points stand out clearly from today's discussion. First, the governments must play a leading role in de-risking the sector. Offshore wind development, like most other marine renewable energy, is capital intensive and complex. Developers face long timelines, high upfront costs, and policy uncertainty. This is where the government leadership is indispensable. Clear long-term targets, stable procurement frameworks, access to concessional financing, and investments in grid readiness are all tools that the governments can use to reduce investor risk, lower the cost of capital, and accelerate project pipelines. As several speakers noted, when the governments lead with consistency and commitment, the private sector will follow with investment and innovation. The most important one is consistency and commitment. If you don't have that, when the governments change, if the policies change, these long-term investments will never come and the private sector cannot do much. Second, we also touched on the importance of local supply chain, building regional capabilities in manufacturing, services, and human capital will be essential to make offshore wind more cost-effective and inclusive. And finally, offshore wind has the potential to be the backbone of a clean energy system in this region. The Asia-Pacific region has the natural resource, the market size, and the innovation capacity to lead the global offshore wind revolution. But that leadership wouldn't happen by default. It requires deliberate choices, collaborative investment, and bold vision. In closing, let this session be a call to action. The winds are favorable, the technology is ready, the momentum is real, and the potential is vast. Our role now is to make offshore wind, as well as other marine renewable energy technologies, bankable, local, and equitable. Let us work together to unlock the full potential of our oceans. Together, we can power a more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient future for Asia and the Pacific. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. With this, we would close the session and take a picture here of all the speakers and panelists. Thank you.